The Wrong Way Home by Kate O'Shaughnessy. First chapter Friday, read aloud video and author interview with the Word Nerd. Today, as you listen, play along. Watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down word by word and then follow the instructions given to your teacher. Be sure to stay all the way to the end to see if you've written it down correctly.
Hi, my name's Amanda Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week, I'm going to be reading to you from The Wrong Way Home by Kate O'Shaughnessy. I read this book this summer while I was at a lake on vacation, and I know there's lots of reasons why we read. Sometimes we read to learn something new, sometimes we read for an assignment or because we're required to. But reading this book reminded me that sometimes it's so amazing and it's so enjoyable just to read for fun, just because we want to, not because there's any assignment or requirement attached to it. Um, and summer is a great time to do that, but as we inch closer to fall and the cooler weather, I really am trying to put down my phone more and pick up a book more often. And I'd really encourage you to do that too. And maybe it's this book, The Wrong Way Home, which is a great story. I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about it. Or maybe it's something else that has caught your eye at the bookstore or the library. But a huge reason of why I do this channel is to help you find books that you can just love for their adventure or love for their characters, not because you have to read it. And it's my goal to get great books on your radar and get them in your hands. So there's my little soapbox today. I hope you find something that you love to read and that it is an enjoyable and amazing experience for you, the way that The Wrong Way Home was for me on my summer reading, on my summer vacation. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the story's about, and then I'm going to read you chapter one, and then make sure that you stick through to the end because we're going to get a chance to talk with the author, Kate O'Shaughnessy. Here's what the story is about. Fern has spent half her life at the ranch, an off the grid, self sustaining community in upstate New York. The work is hard, but Fern loves it and admires the ranch's wise leader, Dr. Ben. So when Fern's mother sneaks them away in the middle of the night and says that Dr. Ben is dangerous, Fern doesn't believe it. She wants desperately to go back, but her mom just keeps driving. Suddenly, Fern is thrust into the treacherous, toxic outside world. At first, she thinks only of how to get back home. She has a plan, but it will take time. And as that time goes by, Fern realizes that there are things she will miss from this place, this outside world, the library, a friend from school, the ocean. And there are things she learned at the ranch that are just not true. Now Fern will have to decide, how much is she willing to give up to return to the ranch? Should she trust Dr. Ben's vision for her life, or listen to the growing feeling that she can live by her own rules? So I was sucked into this book immediately, um, and I loved it, and I hope that you will too. Let's read chapter one of The Wrong Way Home by Kate O'Shaughnessy. Before we came to live at the ranch, Mom and I were like tumbleweeds. We never stayed anywhere for more than a year, maybe two, or at least that's how I remember it. Then again, with every passing year, my memories of what life was like before are becoming less and less solid. It's like I'm looking at the past using pieces of a broken mirror. What I do remember: our freezing cold house in Boston with the cracked board on the front porch, our studio apartment in Brooklyn with the half fridge and its mean people suck sticker that was all ripped around the edges because Mom tried and failed to peel it off. My friend Mallory, who smelled like strawberries and loved the color pink. I knew her in Buffalo, but I can't remember if we met at our apartment complex or at school. I was 6 when Mom and I came to live here, and I'm 12 now. The memories have only grown foggier. A cough from across the room brings me back to myself. When I look down, I realize I've dropped a stitch halfway through the row on the sweater I'm making. A beginner's mistake. Stupid. Now I'll have to go back and fix it. My mind wanders like this sometimes when I'm knitting. I think it's the rhythmic click of the needles, the push and the pull of the yarn. Dr. Ben says I need to focus on the work, so that's what I try and do. But then the coughing starts up again, and it sounds even worse than before. It's Iris, one of the adults. She's coughing so hard one of her knitting needles, that's hard to say, knitting needles, slides from her lap and clatters to the floor. She's only a little bit older than Mom, but since she's been sick, it's like she's aged 30 years. She's gotten so thin you can see the outline of bones in her hands, and her skin has this yellowish white tint to it, like when you stay in cold water for too long. One of the other women goes over and puts her hand on Iris's shoulder, murmurs something to her, and then helps her stand and walks her out of the room. I watch them go, pressing a hand to my chest in sympathy. That cough must hurt. I say a silent prayer that the herbal teas and salves Dr. Ben has her on will start working their magic soon. I put my needles down and take a breath, trying to recenter myself in the present. This is something Dr. Ben does all the time, even if he's in the middle of a conversation. He stops talking, closes his eyes, and breathes in, loud and slow through his nose. And then he'll open his eyes and continue right where he left off. I try to do the same thing, but my nose is still too stuffed up from a cold to get much air through. I look around to see if anyone else is struggling to focus right now. The great room is filled with the gentle sounds of needles clicking, along with the occasional snap or pop from the fireplace. Next to me, Meadowlark is bent almost in half, her nose inches from her work. Her bangs are in her eyes, and the tip of her tongue is stuck between her teeth in concentration. She's only knitting a simple hat, but even from here, I can see that her stitches are uneven. Our seats are by the double windows overlooking the field. It snowed yesterday, and the trees are frosted with ice. It's pretty, but as the sun continues to sink, I know Meadowlark will struggle in the fading light. Her up-close vision isn't good, even under the best of circumstances, and it doesn't help that the cold presses through the glass, making our fingers numb and clumsy. Meadowlark reminds me of a cloud. Maybe it's her fine, wispy, white blonde hair or her pale, almost translucent skin. She's lived here 2 years longer than I have, and she's a few months older, but for some reason I feel protective of her. I think it's that not quite there quality of hers, like she could blow away with a strong gust of wind. I tap her gently on the shoulder, meaning to point out her mistakes so she can fix them. But at the last second, when she looks up at me, I stick out my tongue and cross my eyes instead. She smothers a smile. Then she clears her throat and closes her eyes, composing herself. When she opens her eyes, she bulges them out and curls her lips so it looks like she's toothless. I stifle a laugh. "You look like a possessed turtle," I whisper to her. Hold on, hold on. I can do better." The next face she makes is so hideously ugly, so strange, I feel like I'm about to split apart at the seams. Soon we're both shaking with silent laughter. One of the adults shushes us, which only makes us laugh the harder. I'm making another face at Meadowlark when the doors open to the great room with a great creak. They're wide and wooden, twice the size of normal doors, so they're loud. The clicking of needles stops. Everyone looks up as the doors swing open. It's Dr. Ben. Both Meadowlark and I stop laughing. I grab my needles and start unraveling my last row, the one with the drop stitch. Meadowlark bends over her hat. First, he goes over to the fire where Meadowlark's mom, Dahlia, sits. If Meadowlark is a cloud, her mom is an oak tree, strong and solid. She's got long blonde hair that goes all the way down to her sturdy, thick waist, and a very pretty face that's been weathered by the sun. She nods at whatever Dr. Ben is saying to her, and then he puts his hand on her cheek for a moment before he continues. They aren't married or anything like that, but they might as well be. She's special to him, and that makes her special to the rest of us, too. He moves among our group quietly, stopping every now and then to inspect hats, mittens, sweaters. He drops in like this occasionally. It's never on a schedule. Sometimes he'll surprise us twice in 3 days. Other times he won't come around for months. I keep glancing up to watch him. Even from a distance, he'd be easy to recognize because he always wears the same thing: a pair of jeans with a worn brown belt and leather hiking boots. In the winter, he wears a sweater one of us has knit, and in the summer, a loose, undyed linen shirt. I'm not the only one who's nervous. I see the flash of eyes all around me, the tucking of hair behind ears, and the shifting of bodies. Dr. Ben is the leader of our community. If something is broken, he fixes it. If there's a threat to our family, he stands up to it. He's the person who finds compromises and solutions. Everything we have, everything the ranch provides, is because of him. Even the animals seem to respect him the same way the rest of us do. Somehow they just know. As long as you live up to his ideals, life is beautiful. It all makes sense. Soon he comes to a stop next to me in Meadowlark. He turns to her first. "May I?" he asks, gesturing at her hat. After she hands it to him, she immediately starts chewing on her thumb cuticle. As he turns to head over, inspecting it, my heart is in my throat. I wished I'd pointed out her mistakes earlier instead of making stupid faces at her. I wish I'd help her when she still had a chance to fix her mistakes. But he only nods once and gives it back to her. Then he picks up a corner of the sweater I'm working on and rubs it lightly between his fingers. It'll do, he says finally. But there's room for improvement here, don't you think? I swallow hard. Truth is, I don't like to knit. I'd rather be outside with the men, rounding up the goats and cooping the chickens for the night, feeling hot inside my coat from the effort as my breath fogs out in the cold. Still, his comment stings. I'm glad Meadowlark didn't get in trouble, but I also know my work is much stronger than hers. I can do vertical mosaic patterns, I can make all kinds of things, whereas she hasn't even graduated from hats yet. So why did he point out my shortcomings and ignore hers? For a second, I think about the way Dr. Ben pressed his hand against Meadowlark's mom's cheek, but no, that's not fair. So all I say is, yes, Dr. Ben. Because at the end of the day, he's right. There is room for improvement. I have to stop daydreaming and goofing around. I have to focus harder on the work, on my work, because work is what sustains us. Well, I did come in here with a purpose, not just to distract you all, he adds, in a voice loud enough so everyone can hear. Would you mind joining me in my office for a quick chat, Fern? I have a couple of things I'd like to talk over with you. I point at myself because maybe I misheard him. Me? Yes, you. It shouldn't take long. After a second, Meadowlark nudges me and widens her eyes. She mouths, "Go." I accidentally knock my needles to the floor as I stand. I feel everyone's eyes on me as I bend down to gather them up as I trail along behind Dr. Ben. From across the room, Mom tilts her head and knits her eyebrows together like she's asking me what's going on. I shrug my shoulders a tiny bit. I have no idea. She frowns and her eyes come together even more. Have I done something wrong? I try to figure out what it could be. Did I break something or leave a gate open to the grazing pastures without realizing it? Or something worse? As Dr. Ben and I leave the great room, the doors boom shut behind us. I guess I'm about to find out. And we are about to go talk to the author of The Wrong Way Home, so let's go do that.
Hey, readers. So excited to be here with author Kate O'Shaughnessy today, author of The Wrong Way Home. Kate, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes, I am thrilled because I have questions for you. And the first one is, what was the original story spark for this idea? Because there are a lot of layers to this book, and I'm curious, like, what was the first one? What was the first spark for the story?
Definitely. For some books, it's a harder answer, just because it can be a lot. Like as you say, there's like lots of things that might inform the story. For this one, it was really specific, which is, and I think this refers to what you said is one of your favorite elements of story, which is setting. So
Mhm.
there is a small neighborhood that's a part of Pacifica, which is in Northern California. It's a neighborhood. A town along the coast in just a little bit south of San Francisco. And
Mhm.
it's called Rockaway Beach. And I was meeting a friend there because we were looking for a place that was convenient for both of us. She was in town for work, and we found said, let's go on a hike somewhere that's convenient. And so I found a hike. It's called Maury Point, which is right outside of Rockaway Beach. And when I got there, it was one of those like immediate zings. It was after I had written my first book, when I was working on my second book, Lasagna Means I Love You. And this town is just like, they've got a lot. There's a lot I've pulled and put into the book, which is there's a tea shop. The one in Rockaway Beach is called Lovey's. There's a motel with the parking lot right on the ocean. There are the dramatic cliffs in the ocean, and it's got that sort of cozy story vibe of a place where you're like, oh, I could definitely spend some time here. So for me, it was entirely the setting. I knew on the drive back from this hike, I just felt that sort of excited buzz of like,
Yeah.
I think I'm definitely going to set a story here. And I knew that it was a place that I wanted people to be running away from something to this location. And it wasn't until later that I figured out what the characters would be running away from, which is something that, we don't need to get into right now if that's too spoilery, but that's sort of the genesis of how this book came to be.
That is so interesting. That is not what I thought you were going to say at all. So, thank you. Thank you for sharing that behind the scenes thing. So I had said in our emailing back and forth that my favorite story element is setting. So I love that that was the spark for this story. But what is your favorite story element, to work on?
My favorite is character. I really, from any story that I read, I read really broadly. I read, fantasy, science fiction, adult literary fiction, middle grade contemporary, all of it. And I find that the books that I really come back to have a character who has a really particular voice and world viewpoint. And I think for me, it's the place where, this one was inspired by the setting, but I think the place where I do the most work for the story is in the character and the sort of the journey that they go on through the story, however that, relates to the external things that are happening, but also the journey that they go on, in terms of themselves, their understanding of their place in the world, of their place within their friendships or family. And it's just, for me, that's sort of like the meat of the nut when it comes to
Yeah.
writing.
Well, good job. That came through very clearly in Fern, and we can see, her evolution as a character and her thought process about the place that she had lived and the place she's living now and the people in her life. So, nailed it. Good job on that.
Thank you.
Readers have listened to the first chapter. They know that there's maybe something not quite right with where Fern starts in the story. And so it's okay if this question veers into that a little bit, but I'm curious if you had to do any research for this book. I know that it's a fiction book, it's a made-up story, but a lot of times writers need to do research to inform, the places or the things that their characters do or are going through. So I'm curious if you had to do research for this book, and if so, what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, so I did do a lot of research for this book. The place where Fern comes from and the place she starts out, so as readers have experienced through listening to the first chapter, you can tell something's not quite normal about their community, their society. It's very insular, they're very remote, and it's run by this one sort of dynamic and very arresting personality. His name is Dr. Ben, and he's sort of like he oversees it. He's in charge. He is the leader of their community, and he sort of sets the rules. And this community, I think, the way of sort of talking about it that I think isn't too spoilery for the readers is that, this is not, Fern has not had a normal upbringing in this place. And the way that she lives is not entirely normal. And so when she and her mom leave this place and go, drive across the country to this small seaside town, it's a big shock to the system for Fern. And I had to do so. What I wanted to do is that, a lot of what I'm interested in this book is this idea of truth telling and how you make up your mind about what you believe, how to decide which adults and which power, these positions of people in power and authority, how to sort of like parse out what they're saying. Like, is it true? Do you believe it? All of these things. And so I wanted to create a community in which it was based on a lot of tenets that I truly believe in terms of a lot of things that they do at the ranch. They live lightly on the land, and it's about tight-knit community and supporting each other, and sustainability and environmentally, like being mindful of your environment and the impact that we have on the planet. And then kind of twisting that a little bit to show how a person sort of with this unfettered position of power and respect can take something positive and change it. So I wanted to do a lot of research for this book on these kinds of communities that have this sort of psychological impact on the people who live there. And I did a lot of research on the kinds of people like Dr. Ben, who are, charismatic, and they can be very persuasive in their ideas, and how a person like that, how do you interact with a person like that? Like, what makes them that way? What makes, so there is a variety of things. I watched a bunch of documentaries. I read a lot of books, a couple of, biographies, and really kind of dove into that from like a psychological aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you mentioned both like reading research and watching research, right? Just because I think sometimes when we think research, we think like, oh, I have to be in the library or I have to be with my computer. But like there's lots of different kinds of research, even doing interviews, watching documentaries, like you said, podcasts. So
Yeah.
um
That's something
super
I actually
interesting.
love to touch on for also my first book. I love to talk about because it's a road trip story. It's called The Lonely Heart of Maybelle Lane. And the research I did for that book is I went on the road trip that the characters did. So I had like a really fun trip with my sister. That was the research for that book. And it was really intensive. And I thought about my senses. What was I seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting at the places we stopped along the way. And then for my second book, which is about food and cooking, I did a ton of research by cooking in the kitchen, and reading recipes. And so research, like you said, can have that sort of heavy connotation of like studious in the library with, textbooks, but it doesn't
Yeah.
at all have to be that way. It can be sort of a multi-sense experience.
I love that. And it's the perfect segue into my next question, which is this, The Wrong Way Home is your third book.
Yeah.
You briefly mentioned the other two, and so I'm curious, does it get easier? Like now that this is your third book, you're like, "Meh, I got this, I'm good." Like, are there things that you've learned along the way that have made it easier? Or like, is it still just like as hard as it was from the start? Like, what are your thoughts on that now that you are three books in?
Unfortunate. It would be amazing if it got easier. That would be like I wish that that's my answer to be like, yep, I'm learning along the way. It's getting great. I think each book is its own particular challenge, and certain books for me have come much easier than others. And my first book came fastest out of every book that I have written, and I wish I could say it was easier, but it just, I'm working on my fourth book right now, and it's been a really challenging year. I think I'm finally getting there, but it's been the most challenging sort of creative process that I've had so far. So if anything, it's been the opposite for me, but definitely learn different elements of like, I feel like I do get better on certain things, but it just doesn't get easier for me.
Maybe it's because you try to tackle bigger challenges. Maybe you're like, "Ooh, I'm gonna try this time," and it's, maybe not like a skill set that you already have. So
I love
don't
that
be too hard on
perspective.
yourself.
And, I think maybe that has something to do with it. That's the
Yeah.
hope, right?
Yes. My last question for you is, what do you hope readers will take away from them after they are done reading The Wrong Way Home?
I touched on it a little bit, but I would say for this, I think especially in this day and age, I really want kids to realize like they are in charge of what they believe, and you can go to the library. Like Fern spends a lot of time in the library in this story, and you can, if an adult is telling you something, even if it's a trusted adult, like you have the right to ask questions and think about the things that they're telling you, and to really do your own research. And what you think and what you believe is completely up to you and should be informed by asking those questions and doing that research. And I think to feel empowered, the fact that you own this is a lesson that I want. I really want for kids, because I do think it's a very empowering thing to realize that you don't just have to take information at face value.
Yeah, and I think that's so important in our world today in general, just like with the spread of misinformation or just being critical of the information we're being given. So I think, and I love that we get to learn that lesson through Fern. I love that fiction can be both entertainment, but also like self-development a little bit. So thank you. Thank you for this story. Um, I always close out by asking if you're allowed to tell us what are you working on next? And also, if a reader has another question that I haven't asked you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Working on next, I am working on another middle grade novel. There's been a lot of back and forth. I've been trying out a couple of new things this year. I think I finally settled on what it is, but I haven't like fully talked it over with my editor, so I can't get into
Okay.
content. But it is middle grade, and I'm really hoping that it will be out within the next year or two. So we'll see on that. And then for any questions that reader has on my website, there is I think it's like a contact form that you can just fill out your email, the subject, the question that you have, and I will get those. And I can absolutely write back. And I love getting reader questions, and no question is too silly. So, I'm not always timely, but I do try to respond to all my website mail.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for this time and this interview and also for great books. This is the only one of yours that I've read, so now I have 2 more to go add to my shopping cart. Readers, thank you so much for joining us for this First Chapter Friday video, and we hope you'll come back again next week. We'll see you again next time. Happy reading. To continue reading The Wrong Way Home by Kate O'Shaughnessy, pick up a copy from your school library, purchase one from your favorite local indie bookstore, or grab it via the link in the video description box. Then be sure to check out the rest of the First Chapter Friday playlist. I've got almost 200 middle grade and young adult first chapter read alouds waiting for you. This week's mystery quote says, "Apparently, some books are so popular you have to wait in line behind other people to check them out." Thanks so much for visiting my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd. I hope you come back again for more First Chapter Fridays, brain breaks, direct instruction videos, and more. Please like this video and subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Happy reading.